Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 5 of the Boston Tea Party podcast on the All Day Football Show. I'm your host, Jackson Kellogg, and in today's episode, right before the season starts, we'll be getting into my predictions and analysis for Week 1 against the Miami Dolphins. It's going to be a good game. I'm looking forward to it. And as always, transactions from the last week. So that includes the roster cut down day that happened this past Saturday. So there were a lot of moves that I'll go over. So just to start off, Week 1, we face the Dolphins. We're at home. It'll be Ryan Fitzpatrick was named the starter for Week 1, as was Cam Newton. So it'll be Cam Newton's first start for the Patriots. And Ryan Fitzpatrick won out his camp. I don't know if you would call it a camp battle, but I guess Tua Tagovailoa isn't ready to start yet. So they're throwing Ryan Fitzpatrick out there. So for the Patriots offense, they've looked kind of iffy in camp. They definitely didn't get better at the receiver position, an off-season or a move that they should have done in the offseason. But we have what we have now. So after cut down day, that leaves the Patriots. Their top 3 starting receivers are Julian Edelman, N'Keal Harry, and Damiere Byrd. That doesn't sound like the greatest receiving core ever, which was why I think the Patriots are going to go with a ground and pound with play action approach. Brady did great in New England when working with the play action, but with that you have to get a good running game going, and they didn't have the offensive line last year to do that, with David Andrews out and them having to rotate between tackles with Isaiah Wynn and Marcus Cannon both missing time. So with a solid O-line this year, other than the right tackle, which from everything we've heard, Jermaine Illuminor will be the starting right tackle in Week 1, and he hasn't done terrible in camp, so hopefully he does well in the game action. But other than that, the O-line is solid and healthy. Might be one of the best offensive lines out there. So I think with that, and Jakob Johnson, our fullback this year, being healthy, with some hopefully better tight end play from our 2 rookies, Asiasi and Keene, I think we're going to look to see a crazy running game with Michelle, Damian Harris when he comes off IR, Rex Burkhead coming in on some plays, and James White being the receiving back. So look for Michelle to get a ton of carries, anywhere from 15 to 30 this week. And then with that, because the Dolphins' defense on paper looks great, they've brought in a whole bunch of new additions, but it'll be hard for them to figure out, because they brought in so many different players, they have to get chemistry first, and they have to have game action to get that done, and they haven't had that yet. They brought in Van Noy from New England, they brought in Byron Jones from the Cowboys, they brought Emmanuel Ogbah in from the Chiefs. I think he was last with Shaq Lawson from the Bills. So they've added a whole bunch of pieces, but they haven't worked together yet. So they got to figure that out on defense, and I think that's the perfect way for New England to work on that play action. Give it to Michelle a couple times, he gets 4 or 5 yards of carry, then they're stacking the box, and then play action. N'Keal Harry over the top for 20 yards. Julian Edelman in the slot for a 15-yard catch, and then another 10 yards of rack. So all of that, I think this is the perfect game for New England to practice their offense in a game situation that they haven't had yet. From what it sounds like from camp, the wide receivers haven't been getting separation other than Edelman, which is a little bit scary to me. N'Keal Harry's meant to be one of those big physical receivers who are supposed to go get it. So as long as he can do that, we should have at least 2 solid receivers in Edelman and Harry this year. But look for a lot of running plays this year between Sony Michel, Cam Newton getting quarterback designed runs. It's going to be a run-heavy offense this year, at least to start. So now if we look at the defensive side, there have been so many different changes on the defense this year. We lost Danny Shelton, lost Calvin Noy, lost Jamie Collins, lost Landon Roberts, and we lost Daron Harmon. Then we had Chung opt out and Hightower opt out. So that is almost a completely new linebacking core. That's a different defensive line, different secondary. So there's a lot of players stepping into new roles this year. And I'm not too much worried about the secondary because almost everyone is the same there, except in the safeties, which Devin McCourty is still there, and then it'll be Chung and Phillips taking in the roles of Chung and Harmon. So I'm not too worried about the secondary. It's the front seven, mainly the linebackers, that I'm worried about. On the Patriots official website, but on their unofficial depth chart, they call it unofficial because they can't really reveal who the starters are and what the depth chart actually looks like. But if you look at the depth chart, you've got Chase Winovich, Jawan Bentley, Shalik Calhoun, and Brandon Copeland listed as the 4 starting linebackers in a standard 3-4 defense, with John Simon, Lawrence Guy, and Adam Butler as the starting 3. So 3-4. That's a little surprising to me, seeing that Uche isn't the starter over Calhoun to play inside linebacker at the very least. Maybe that's not right. The depth charts are unofficial mainly because they're done by the Patriots reporters themselves. It's not like Bill Belichick going on to the media people and saying, hey, this is our depth chart. So we won't really know exactly who's starting where until the games happen. But as long as the Patriots can figure out how to get some pass rush in there, which they didn't have a ton of issues with last year, but 2 of their biggest sack leaders, Kyle Van Noy and Jamie Collins, are both gone. So they have to figure out a way to get that production from other players. And then the biggest issue with the Patriots defense last year was run defense. They got run over a buttload of times, and that's mainly why they lost the AFC wildcard game to the Titans, because Ryan Tannehill kept running halfback dive and halfback stretch, and it was Derrick Henry for 5 yards, then Derrick Henry for 8 yards, then Derrick Henry for 7 yards, and then 12 yards. It over and over and over, and then it was, they weren't even doing play action that well because of how well the Patriots secondary was doing. Like, the Patriots had to switch to a 6-1 defense, where they had 6 players on the defensive line and 1 linebacker behind them. Like, it was bad. So the Patriots like to run 3-4 the most out of standard position-wise. I think the formation they ran the most plays out of was 5 players in the secondary. But if you're going with your standard 2 corners and 2 safeties, they do 3-4 more than 4-3. So is that going to work in terms of stopping the run? We don't know. I wouldn't say this is the best way to see how that run defense is going to hold up. They're going against Matt Breida and Jordan Howard. They're both solid running backs, but they're not like a Derrick Henry that they might face in the playoffs. Like, running backs the Patriots are going to have to face later on this season: Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Josh Jacobs, Chris Carson, Austin Eckler, Devin Singletary, Le'Veon Bell twice, Devin Singletary twice. So they're going to have to face a whole bunch of running backs that are better than these 2. And it'll be a good chance to work on the run defense, but it's going to have to be a very solid performance there to prove that the run defense actually has a chance to be solid this year. So all in all, my predictions for this game, I do think the Patriots win with a score of 34-13. With that, I think Cam Newton can get 3 total touchdowns, whether it's just 3 passing or 2 passing and a running touchdown. I think Cam Newton's going to have a solid game, built around mostly a solid defensive turnout with 2 turnovers, maybe a Gilmore interception, but at least an interception in there. It'll be a solid defensive performance that will help the Patriots work on that ground and pound, and they'll just keep scoring. So that's how I think the game will go. I'll do this every week as my analysis for the Patriots games alone. I'd like to do game picks for each game in general, but they won't be this much detailed with other games. So with that, weekly transactions, and this is cut down style. So these players no longer on the roster or the practice squad, meaning they were cut and they were not brought back on the practice squad, they weren't re-signed, they're just gone. So the biggest move was them releasing Mohamed Sanu. He was not performing well in training camp, I guess, and he had $6.5 million owed this year, but none of it guaranteed. So they decided that it would be better to just release him. What I think would be really hilarious is if the Falcons picked back up Mohamed Sanu. I would be just so upset because the Patriots gave the Falcons a second-round pick to get him, and it would just be saying like, "Oh, come on back. Sorry we traded you, but we wanted that second-round pick, which we then turned to get tight end Hayden Hurst. So it wasn't necessarily the best value, but we'd like to welcome you back." So yeah, as at the moment, Mohamed Sanu is a free agent, but that would be disappointing if he went back to the Falcons. Some other players that released: defensive lineman Michael Barnett, cornerback Michael Jackson, who we traded a pick to the Lions for. Apparently that didn't work out, even though it sounded like he had a pretty good camp. Offensive linemen Ben Braden and Tyler Gauthier, linebacker Scooter Harris, quarterback Brian Lewerke. Two other big names that were kind of surprises: running back Lamar Miller. He only played in one practice, and then they cut him after coming off of PUP. So I don't know what that means for him. Maybe, especially since that the Patriots had to put Damien Harris on IR. Granted, he can come back in 3 weeks, but so with that move, they promoted J.J. Taylor, who I'll get into in a second, from the practice squad. But the fact that they didn't keep Lamar Miller, I think, speaks something, especially if they're going to go with a ground and pound approach. And the other little bit of a surprising cut, mainly because a whole bunch of Patriots fans were rooting for him to make the roster. Wide receiver Jeff Thomas, undrafted free agent out of Miami, came into the NFL undrafted because it was said that he had talent, but he had off-the-field issues. So the Patriots gave him a chance, except that talent was nowhere to be found. So he was barely at practice because he was injured, and then when he was there, it didn't make a difference. So they cut him, and they didn't even decide to add him onto the practice squad. So all these guys have not been picked up at the moment, I'm pretty sure. Unless otherwise. Actually, that's a lie. I think Scooter Harris was picked up by the Packers practice squad. I think so, but I don't know for sure. But other than that, none of these guys have been picked up, and they are all available free agents. So now players that are on the practice squad, this is a long list. You've got up to 16 players that you can put on the practice squad, and they filled it. So all these players, most of it in alphabetical order until the end. They've got tight end / defensive lineman Rashad Berry, D lineman Tayshawn Bauer, defensive back Miles Bryant, tight end Jake Burt. Little bit of a surprise here. The Patriots cut both kickers, Nick Folk and Justin Rohrwasser, and then they stuck them both on the practice squad. So currently on the Patriots' 53-man roster, they do not have a kicker. What I think, so I didn't understand it until I put some thought into it. You're allowed to promote 2 players from the practice squad each week for your active roster. I'm pretty sure. But it might be a move to where they promote whichever kicker is doing better for the week and then stick them back on the practice squad and give that as an extra spot on your roster that you have. That might not be the case, but it'd be a really Belichick type move if that's what he was doing. Linebacker Terez Hall, defensive line Bill Murray, tight end Paul Casenberry, already mentioned Rohrwasser, defensive back D'Angelo Ross, wide receiver Devin Ross, defensive lineman Nick Thurman, defensive lineman Xavier Williams, wide receiver Isaiah Zuber. These guys were all initially put on the practice squad, as well as J.J. Taylor and Cash Maluia were both put on the practice squad as well. But with injured reserve moves, putting Damien Harris on IR and Bo Allen on IR, they moved both of those guys up to the main roster and added on wide receiver Mason Kinsey and wide receiver Christian Wilkerson to their practice squad. So like I just said, injured reserve, 2 players were put onto it. Damien Harris was thrown on for his pinky finger, which is more injured than they thought it was. And defensive tackle Bo Allen was put on there, but it isn't really exactly known what his injury is. I couldn't find it anywhere, so I guess they're keeping that under the radar for the moment, not releasing that information. That leaves the defensive tackle spot a little low in depth, but running back is still okay because they promoted J.J. Taylor from the practice squad on it. So we'll see how these moves impact the season for the Patriots. With the new injured reserve list rules, players can come back after 3 weeks, and you can pull unlimited players back. So these guys could very well be back in 3 weeks, pending how well their injuries heal. So we'll find that out in the next couple weeks. But with that, guys, thank you so much for watching. It means a lot if you stuck around and watched this whole thing. Please subscribe if you haven't already. I'm sure most of you haven't. Please leave a like. It would help a lot. Looking forward to watching the Patriots game this week, and the Patriots as a whole for this year. I think it's going to be a great season. Hopefully it ends with at least a playoff berth, but obviously would love for them to make the Super Bowl with Super Cam. Again, thank you guys so much for watching. Have a good rest of your day, and go Pats.